Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold M. Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
Welcome to another episode of Moral Courage, where we look into the life and times and theology and stories of our great Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis. The guest today is none other than Rabbi David Wolpe, considered one of the great rabbis of America. He was at Sinai Temple for most of his career, including he made national headlines in 2001 talking about the authenticity, the veracity, how real the Exodus story might be. And if it's not real, what do we learn from it? And it really exploded the synagogue scene, really redefined what Judaism was for a whole generation. Since then, he's worked at Harvard, he's worked with the ADL. He's just incredible. He's got stories about Rabbi Schulweis and stories of his own upbringing, being the son of another preeminent rabbi, Rabbi Gerald Wolpe. So can't wait for you to hear this. Here is Rabbi David Wolpe. Rabbi David Wolpe, welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast. I'm so happy to have you here. I grew up listening to you. I grew up loving rabbis and loving what rabbis said. It's actually what made me not want to be a rabbi, is I was so intimidated by hearing like greats, people who could tell a story and make it funny and touching and can make me cry. And I grew up with Schulweis and you and Feinstein and just so many great ones. I thought, who could do this? So I just want to share this short story before we go into like the real meat of this. Is when I was in rabbinical school, I was walking on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. For whatever reason, people walk on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and I saw a star that said David Wolpe.
Right.
And I took a picture of it, and he was the producer of Roots and Willy Wonka.
Yeah.
I took a picture, and it cut off the R of Wolpe, so it looked like it said David Wolpe. And I showed like other rabbis and rabbinical students, and everybody was like, yeah, of course, obviously David Wolpe has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Like, do you know who he is? And I was like, yeah, I don't know if they just give him out to like great rabbis, but it was just funny that everybody I showed it to was like, yeah, obviously.
I have actually a funny story about that. I ended up doing his funeral. And the way I ended up doing his funeral is we used to get each other's medicine.
Oh, wow.
And so he knew of my existence, and he came to me and said, I don't have a rabbi, but I know about you because, like, I don't remember whether I got his or he got mine. And so we had several meetings, and then when he passed away, I did his eulogy.
Oh, that's very funny. That's so right. Strange how we find each other through CVS or whatever. Did you grow up thinking that you were going to be a rabbi?
No, I grew up
father
convinced
was.
I wouldn't be a rabbi. Actually, really, because my father was a rabbi in Philadelphia, and he was a wonderful rabbi and a wonderful person, but I never thought it was something I wanted. But I mean, I wasn't antagonistic to Judaism. I used to work at Ramah. I just didn't want to be a rabbi. And when I graduated college, I was working at Ramah. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do. And Elliot Dorff said, what do you want to do with your life? And I said, I want to be a writer. He said, what do you want to write about? I said, I don't really know anything. I just always wanted to write. And he said, why don't you go to rabbinical school for a year? The worst that happens is you'll learn something. And the best that happens is you'll get your subject. So I said, okay. And I did. And it was like literally that spontaneous. And when I went, I loved it and I stayed.
Wow. You need an Elliot Dorff in your life.
Yeah.
For me, it was Schulweis. I was doing all sorts of things, and Schulweis said, no, go to rabbinical school. I was like, I don't think so. There's this job at HBO, and they're like, just go for a little bit and see how you like it. And then once you're in school, you're studying the great texts. Are you convinced at this point? Because then your path in the rabbinate wasn't, I mean, almost everybody from my class that graduated, not everybody, but mostly everybody went to a pulpit. It was kind of assumed, unless you had something else lined up.
Right. I was never going to go to a pulpit.
Yeah. Right. You were teaching, you were the librarian, you were
Right,
writing,
exactly.
you're on the
Right.
national news.
And then what happened was that a lot of what I was doing was traveling and writing. And then we were going to have a child and realized that traveling all the time is not really a good way to raise a kid. And that was when I decided to take a pulpit, because at least I'll be in the same home every night. And then I came to Sinai. I had done high holiday services there for many years, and so I already knew them. But I wasn't a pulpit rabbi until '97.
Were you living in LA?
No, I was living in, at the time that I took the job, I was actually back teaching at the seminary in New York.
Yeah.
I had left what was then called the UJ to go to the seminary to be on the East Coast. And then I took the job at Sinai, and I've been there until I retired ever since.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I heard an interview recently with you at VBS in like 98.
Wow.
I did the math, and like, you were in your 30s. You're a child,
Yeah.
right? And
Yep.
Your list of accomplishments. Wait, so how did it go? First of all, how did it go in rabbinical school? Or at some point, how did you get to be the place where when CNN needed somebody, they go to this young rabbi instead of going to like Schneerson, you know?
So you get on people's Rolodexes, basically. And so they know, oh, when we called this guy, he answered, and we liked his answer. And so that was part of it. And I just also think that I was always somebody who was very comfortable at public presentations. I never get nervous when I speak. And so I was easy to talk to, because I, first of all, for some reason that I don't exactly understand or can't explain, words have always come easily to me. And it's never been hard for me to respond to people's questions and to be fairly concise. And those are the things that you really need. You need to be concise, and you need to address them easily. And also, you need to be able to speak in terms that people can understand.
Right. Was this like growing up, were you brought onto the bima to do like Ashrei, Anim Zmirot, something like that?
No, my father was very good about that. We were not the rabbi's kids that way at all. I have 3 brothers.
Yeah.
2 of us became rabbis, but none of us were like display. We were obviously on display because we were the rabbi's kids, but we were not expected to be super Jews.
Right. I mean, this is something that I try to walk that line with my kids.
Yeah.
Because they like Hebrew school. They're not really,
Right.
It's different now maybe than it was a generation ago too.
It's definitely different. Yes.
But in this piece on VBS, I guess you were new to Sinai at the time, and Shulweiss brought you in and said, why don't you speak at the shul? And it was one of those, again, that he told you what to say, and you said, I'm going to say my own thing because I know what I want to do. And he said something like he can, yeah.
I was going to say, we have a family history that I should probably start with.
Okay.
So Shulweiss and my father were at school at the same time and knew each other. And Shulweiss was a little bit older than my father. And my father told me that he helped him, that is, Shulweiss helped my father get through A.J. Ayer's philosophy class at NYU. So so when I came to meet Shulweiss for the first time, I was Jerry Wolpe's kid. I wasn't just a rabbinical student that he had no connection to. And when I asked my father about Shulweiss, I didn't know who he was before I came out to LA, because I didn't really follow the rabbi world. I wasn't going to be a rabbi.
Right.
And I said to my father, do you know who Harold Shulweiss is? And my father said, yes. I said, who is he? I'll never forget what my father answered. He said, he's the most talented man in the American rabbinate. And I thought, oh, this is a guy I got to meet. If my father thinks that about him, I really want to meet him.
Was there a chevra of rabbis back then? Was it like, were they getting together and schmoozing and friendly, or was it you have your fiefdom and I have my fiefdom?
You're talking about in my father's day or for me?
I was thinking for you when you got out here.
I was at the UJ, so I don't really know. Okay. I saw the rabbis here and there, and my chevra was really the group that was teaching at the UJ/AJU. Danny Gordis, Bob Wexler, Elliot Dorff. Those were the people that I knew best. Most of them, other than Danny, older than I was, but those were the people I knew, because that was my. I also knew some people from Ramah, Alvin Mars, Gil Graff and Robin Graff, who were Ramah people. So
in Schulweiss's telling of the story from '98, he convinced you to take a pulpit. Is that at all true, or is it like you were?
I believe. I mean, it may be true. I don't remember it that way. I remember coming to him when I decided to take the pulpit to ask him how you run a synagogue. That I remember. And I remember one of the things I remember he said was the way, because what I was afraid of was that I would get swallowed up by the synagogue. And I wanted to do other things too. And Schulweiss was the exemplar of somebody who transcended his pulpit. So I said to him, how do you do that? And he said to me, you have to have ruthless focus on what you want to accomplish. And that means you get to give it 10% of your time, because the demands of the synagogue are so great that ruthless focus gives you 10%.
I mean, I'm like living it, and I feel like we could have a whole separate podcast on how to be a rabbi in the world today.
No doubt about it.
And I don't know if it's true. Janice Kaminer-Resnick's version of it is that he never used a computer. I just can't imagine this job without constant email. Even, I mean, at home,
right.
Every second, keeping up on the news. Not that I'm talking about the news from the pulpit, but like, you got to know what's going on.
In that sense, it's gotten a lot harder. When I started out in '97, there was no email. When you were done for the day, you were done. And if there was an emergency, someone would call you. But now somebody's sitting at home at 8:00 and something occurs to them and they email you or they text you or, and the constant volume is really wearing, and it's very difficult. And I think it's harder to be a rabbi now than it was when I started out.
It's definitely different. I mean, there's parts of it that I am so happy that they exist, and other parts that, we got out of Yontif, and I look at my phone and how many text messages I've missed that are all people who need me now. That 20 years ago, they would have left a series of voicemails or whatever happened, and I would have had my name.
They probably wouldn't have. One or two of them would have left voicemails. The others would have known they couldn't reach you, and they would wait.
And it's changed quite a bit.
Yes.
What was the advice aside from ruthless focus? What else about how to be a rabbi?
I think that he was. I remember he spoke about programming, but we're talking about 30 years ago.
Sure. Yeah.
So I don't really remember that many details. It's funny. I remember a picture of where we were sitting, but I don't really remember too many other details about that conversation. So.
And then how often are I mean, growing up, I saw, I don't want to make anybody else feel like they're not part of this, but it felt like Sinai and VBS from my childhood were the two pillars of the Jewish community. It's changed a lot in those years. How much dialogue was there between them? There's somebody coming in from Israel. You got to have the speaker. You take this day. We take. I mean, was there dialogue between them, or?
So it was coordination was difficult. We didn't actually do that well in coordinating with other synagogues because they all had their own procedures and their own people. And if someone was coming in, then you had to run it by your lay board, and we had to run it by our lay board. So there wasn't as much cooperation as we would have liked. I mean, nobody was, we won't cooperate with you. It's just logistically difficult. But I will say this, and he certainly knew this. I drove around for years with cassettes of Schulweiss's sermons. And for me, what I got from VBS was that I mean, at a certain point, you don't even know if you're quoting a story or a thought that you heard from him 10 years ago, but he was incredibly enriching to the intellectual life of any rabbi, and not just the intellectual life, the story life, the narrative life, the sermonic life of any rabbi, and certainly was to me because I used to always get all of the cassette tapes and drive around and listen to them. And when it was something that I thought was really good, I would pull over and I'd write it down so I wouldn't forget. It's like what T.S. Eliot said about poetry, that, immature poets borrow and mature poets steal. So I was a mature rabbi. I stole a lot.
I think it was like my first high holidays, and I turned to my dad, who also learned at the feet of Rabbi Schulweis. And I go, I think everything I've written in my sermon so far for Rosh Hashanah is just what Ed Feinstein said last year. And he's like, well, that's where you start.
That's
You
part
start
of the
by
course.
saying, right. And like, and the next year was Sharon Brous, and the next year, and like, and at some point I find my own voice. It's really hard to find it straight out of school where I can quote Talmud and Midrash, but how do I make it about life? Did you do also the cassettes? Like, was that a thing that people did?
Yes, I did cassettes, and then we did CDs, and then they were online. And so I have a huge backlog of sermons online going back many years.
Do you ever revisit yours?
I'll tell you when I revisited them.
Yeah.
For a couple of years, I was writing a Torah column for the Jerusalem Post. And when the holiday would come up, I would think, wonder if I said something that I'd like to make the column out of. So every now and then I would listen with varying degrees of chagrin or pleasure, depending on the sermon.
I mean, your speaking style has always been, powerful. Is it the theology that changed? Is it something else that when you listen back with chagrin, you're going?
I think part of it is that I think since I spoke in this, I was the exact opposite of Schulweis. Schulweis used to write out every single word.
Right.
And even though he knew them so well that you did not feel like he was reading, we had spoken about this. He would write out every word. I would make notes. I never wrote out my sermons. And if on high holidays, I would write out much more, but I never wrote out a whole sermon. And when you speak spontaneously, it has the advantage of spontaneity and the disadvantage of spontaneity. So every now and then I would say something I would think as I listen back, I should have said this, I forgot that, sure. I could have added this, on and on and on. And so the self-criticism is, it's part, actually, I don't want to overdo it. It's part of what makes you better, but it's also part of what gives you that sense of, oh God, I can't believe I said that.
I write out every word. When in school, Feinstein said, I think his quote to the class was, Harold Schulweis wrote his sermons, so you should too. And some of my best sermons are ones I just had like 6 words on a piece of paper and I knew what I was going to say.
It depends how you work. I could not do that. I know because my first rabbinic position was with Moshe Rothblum. I was his assistant rabbi. Student intern, really. It was my second year of rabbinical school. And he insisted that I write out every word. And he was, by the way, a fantastic rabbi to be a student for. He was wonderful, really just great in so many ways. But he insisted that I write out every word. And so he told me that he thought it was important that I learn to do that. And so I did. And I felt every time like I was putting on a straitjacket before I got up to the pulpit. And the day that I didn't have to do that anymore, for me, my speaking got much better because I really need the freedom of allowing things to occur to me as I'm in the moment. That's just the way I work. I think of E.M. Forster said, how do I know what I think till I see what I say? And I'm very much like that. So sometimes I would give a sermon and afterwards I would think, I didn't know that I thought that, but I clearly do.
Did you ever open it up? Schulweis would often, people would raise their hands and he's calling on everybody and it'd be a 45-minute sermon because part of it was like Q&A. Did you ever do that? Or you're like, I didn't
do it as part of the sermon. I did it as teaching sometimes beforehand. I would do a teaching and then later I would give the sermon, but I didn't open it up during the sermon. No.
Do you have a place that you're getting your ideas generally, right? It was high holidays and you're going, what am I going to say this year? And you're going, well, this year I've read these books and I've read these articles. Or
I get my ideas exactly as you said, from books. I always have, even now on these high holidays, when I was thinking of what do I want to write, I've pared my library down considerably. I gave away thousands of books when I retired, but I still have a lot of books. And so I went back to some of my favorite books to look again. And I read and I think, but mostly I get my ideas from books and articles and, the classic sources.
Yeah. Like Forster and T.S. Eliot.
Exactly. Right.
All the good ones. Did you ever find yourself in the Schulweis position of mentoring other young rabbis? Or one of my teachers said there's two kinds of mentors. One is those who say they're good mentors, and one who knows that rabbis aren't good mentors. Do you find like we're just too busy? You have your way of doing it.
I was not. I was. The rabbis who worked for me, I mentored, and I had a lot of assistants in the course of my. And I was very upfront with them at the beginning about what kind of mentor I was. I said, I will not stick my head in your office and say, how's everything going? But you can ask me anything at any moment. So I can't mentor someone who's not a self-starter because we'll never talk. I'm very much, I'm a somewhat asocial character. I'm not a social person. Mm-hmm. In this, by the way, I think that I was similar to Schulweis. Schulweis was probably a little more social than I was, but people used to say, you don't go to Harold Schulweis for cuddly, warm interactions. And I think that some people would probably say the same of me. But when someone came and wanted advice, and I had many, as I said, I had many rabbinical students, I was willing to spend as long as they wanted, but I didn't generally initiate it, and I was not systematic. I didn't have structures. And this was one of the things that was very good about Rothblum that I couldn't get from my father. Like Rothblum had files and structures and procedures. My father used to say, if you have a question, I can answer it, but I can't tell you in advance, you should set your office up this way or your time up that way. And so I was much more like my father in that sense.
The podcast has been called Moral Courage. I don't remember how we stumbled upon that one, but it's the life that he led. It's the rabbinate that he led, and I feel like you are one of his great equals in that way. Is that you're not afraid on the bima or in your columns or anywhere else to say what you need to say. How do you find that?
So first of all, I don't. He was really a beacon, and even in the places where I didn't, he was more liberal than I am, but he never took a position that I didn't enormously respect because the force of his intellect and the depth of his reasoning and just he was really yachid b'mino. He was unique, and I think that that a lot of it has to do with the recognition. Like I remember, I'll tell you the story that epitomizes this. So I remember when I was going to announce I was going to do same-sex marriage, there were two things that happened that essentially explain why I wasn't afraid to take adversarial positions. The first was that I said to my daughter the day before I was going to send out the letter, I said, when you go to school tomorrow, you might hear bad things about your father. And she said, why? And I said, because I'm going to send out this letter that says I'm doing same-sex marriage. And she looked at me puzzled. She was like 11 or 12 years old at the time. And she said, what took you so long? Mm. And I realized that the first thing about not being afraid to take adversarial positions is if you have the respect of people who love you, then honestly, that's where you live. That people whom you don't really interact with very much say bad things about you, like online or whatever. It's so what? That's not where you live. That's not the people that you have to actually, have dinner with and interact with and judge yourself by. So that was first. And then afterwards, I remember after the big blow up and the headlines and the so on, and then when things calmed down, I said to my daughter, I hope that you'll take a lesson from this. I said, Churchill said during the Boer War, it's exhilarating to be shot at without result. I said, the people who loved me before still love me. The people who don't like me still don't like me. And the world did not explode because I said what I honestly believed. And I think both of those things you find in it's like, yes, there's some temporary discomfort where people are angry at you, but they go on with their lives and you're not the center of their lives. And so it's both humbling and also encouraging to recognize that ultimately, what you say, you have to live with you. They don't have to live.
But there's so many of these decisions, and you've got a board of directors, and you got past presidents, and you got the outspoken people.
Okay. That's but that's a somewhat different. That's not really so much about courage and principle. So there I would say you have to pick a few battles that really matter to you. Like the same-sex marriage thing really mattered to me. I could not, at a certain point, I could not keep going in my pulpit and telling people who came to me that I can't marry you because you want to marry the only kind of person, as one person put it to me, the only kind of person I can love, or love in that way, love fully, love both physically and emotionally and spiritually. But in terms of small battles, I also like, and again, I guess since I'm recurring to my father again, he was blessed with the temperament and bequeathed it to me of being able to let a lot of little things go. And you have to be able to, because if you don't, the rabbinate is a terrible job, because there are a lot of things that are irritants that you get every day, that people will always object to stuff that you said. They'll always be upset with things that you didn't do. Human need is endless and you're limited. And so that's one of the things that I always said to my incoming rabbis is someone else's legitimate expectation is not your legitimate obligation. It makes sense that someone would want me to stay at the party after the wedding I perform, but I never do. And I'm not upset with their being upset about that. Let them be upset. But if I do, then that's it. I have no life.
Yeah.
So you have to make those calculations and understand that you will upset people. That's the human needs job.
Right. I tell them I'm no fun at a party. Like, I'm not a great dancer. I'm not a great drinker. Nobody wants me there.
You're not there for fun. You're there for prestige.
Yeah. Right. They want to say, oh, the
rabbi came to my bar mitzvah party.
Yeah. So there's the ridiculous and fun series of books by Kemmelman about the Sunday, the rabbi, and it's like every book is like the rabbi against the board and like the hill he's going to die on. Yeah. And every time you go like, and we feel that because there's a group of people who care about the future of the synagogue and I guess Judaism in this corner of the world. And you go, how do you balance all of that? When you were stepping down from your stint as senior rabbi, head rabbi, chief rabbi, I don't know. Whatever.
Senior rabbi is what they call
rabbi.
it.
Of Sinai, the Jewish Journal called you the fearless rabbi, which makes me also think of like this idea of moral courage. Do you know why? Like of all the adjectives to put on you,
I think it was because of the Exodus sermon, the same-sex marriage thing, and maybe even, I don't know, there were major battles over COVID too. But I think that that's probably why, is that but I did have a synagogue where there were major political divisions. And so you couldn't leave that synagogue without taking stands. There was just no way to do it because people were on the opposite sides of issues that demanded that they be decided one way or the other. But also I had both dispositionally, and I think also, this is probably not a wise thing to say, but I'll say it anyway, dispositionally, but also realistically. I think that it is a bad strategy for rabbis to let the synagogue know that the rabbi needs them. Because if the rabbi needs the synagogue, then the synagogue can make it very hard for them to be principled. But I think my synagogue always felt that I loved them, which I did, and I was really happy to be there, which I was. But if the next day something in the synagogue made me need to leave, I would leave. Mm. And that, I think, makes it much easier to feel like you can take stands of principle because your entire life is not bound up in the necessity of staying in the synagogue. So I think that's part of it too.
You brought up the Exodus sermon, which I think I wrote a paper on in college. But can you talk about it?
Sure. So I really think that the story of the Exodus sermon is that people were not honest with their congregations about what conservative Judaism taught. Because if you look at in the essay, in Eitz Chaim, which is the Chumash we all use, Lee Levine, in his essay about the Exodus, says exactly what I said to my congregation. But he says it in an essay in the back of the book, and so but I felt like if the people in my congregation, especially the younger ones, were ever going to go to college and learn anything about modern biblical study or about the history of the Jewish tradition as opposed to the story of the Jewish tradition, they'd be learning this. I think to the extent that I made a mistake with that sermon, which I then corrected with the same-sex marriage thing, was I should have given classes before the sermon on that topic rather than after, which I did after, to prepare, though, that I'm sure most of the people wouldn't have come to the class and wouldn't have been prepared anyway. But I still stand by what I said in the sermon. And I think in the end, even though it was a pretty tumultuous time, the conversation is an important conversation for American Jews to have, which is your faith based on the historicity of the events in the Torah, or is it based on the truth of the Torah?
The capital T truth seems to be what we're there for, and we shouldn't look at Torah as a journalistic account of what actually happened, which, I mean, my favorite commentator, aside from you, is Radak, is 800 years ago, and he goes through it, creation story, and he talks about how these aren't days. Stop reading this as days. And the fact that he could say this before Copernicus is, to me, is so moving to me that we could read this through a scientific lens.
Right.
And we don't have to give up a part of what we know to be true for what's in this book, which is a beautiful, poetic explanation.
And by the way, I was speaking to a congregation, all of whom had actually gone through the Exodus, because a myth. Someone once said that a myth is something that never happened but is always happening, and there was the Iranian community who were literally delivered from death and who escaped to a new land, and so I mean I felt like these are people who understand. That's one of the reasons why Passover was such a big holiday in the Soviet Union. They understand it on a level that has nothing to do with the historical events and everything to do with the truth of the story.
Did you in the process learn Farsi?
No, sadly. I don't have much of a facility with languages. My Hebrew is okay, but only from a lot of work. And so there was Ari Brown, who was a cantor there for a couple of years. She learned Farsi in a week and a half. And I just felt,
Yeah. I mean, she's got an ear for everything.
She really does.
Which is really incredible. But that's, and so did you find other sermons got the same level of attention as the Exodus sermon? Or once that happened, it was just...
Oh, I think that was the biggest in terms of a single sermon. I don't think anything else quite matched that. And I am only lucky that it happened before the age of social media.
That was what's weird. Yeah.
Because had it happened in the age of social media, it would have been, nuclear.
It was interesting I try not to go on, and I'm not posting, and I can't have an opinion about everything that's happening in the news, and I try not to do any of that. But going on, I think between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and I'm scrolling through, and I see that some group, an anti-Israel group, has taken a sermon that a rabbi gave on Rosh Hashanah and showed, see, this is what they're saying in their synagogues, because it's on social media and they can now have access to it, and it really changes the conversation. I'm glad that our synagogue is a little bit behind on that kind of stuff, because I don't need strangers and trolls and AI on the other side of the world to be commenting on it. We wrap up each time with a question on what you're currently studying, or if there's a text that's troubling you or exciting you. And I realize that you're constantly studying. I mean, some rabbis are just busy because they got stuff going on, and I remember when you came to speak to our class in rabbinical school, you first went to the library and picked out a bunch of books to take home with you, because there's always more to learn. So what are the 35 books that you're reading right now?
So let me tell you first, I want to say since this is a podcast in his memory and in his honor, that I think often of things that Schulweis said, and one I want to share in case this somehow got lost along the way, because I think it's one of the most brilliant things I ever heard, and this is a teaching that the whole world could usefully remember. I was once sitting in a sermon where he was talking about people's relationship to their parents, and he said, "You can blame your parents for the pain you feel, but not the pain you cause." And I thought that was such a brilliant distinction and so important. And I think of it all the time. When someone does something bad and they go back to their childhood, I always think, no, she always taught us, you can blame your parents for the pain you feel, but not the pain you cause. And so I just didn't want to go through the podcast without, I have so often thought of that insight. I wanted to remind people of it.
Yeah, I love that.
What I'm actually reading right now, which is a very demanding book, and I think that it's interesting because I'm interested in the manifestations of the Kabbalistic idea of tzimtzum, of contraction. And it's especially because I've had a longstanding interest in the idea of Hester Panim, of God's hiding God's face, and their related ideas. So I'm reading a book by Eli Rubin on the existential philosophy of Chabad and how it developed. And almost the entire book is really about how Chabad took and reinterpreted tzimtzum, this idea of contraction. And it's very subtle and it's very interesting, and I'm getting a lot out of reading it. I am also rereading. I'm actually re-listening to. I've reread it like 5 or 6 times, and I'm now listening to it, which I've never done. My favorite English novel, which is Middlemarch. So,
during the pandemic, that was like on everybody's list. You got to read it. And I went to a small bookstore that I love, and I got Middlemarch, and I get home, and I need somebody to like walk me through this. Do you think listening to it's better?
It might be, but it definitely, because she was like the pressure of her intelligence you feel on every page. It's a demanding read as novels go, but right. I very much love it. And I first read it in youth and it blew me away. And so I don't want to give a misimpression. I also read at least a couple mysteries every week. I am an inveterate mystery novel reader, and I've just been reading the 2, Every One of My Relatives is a Murderer, and Everyone on This Train is a Suspect by Benjamin Stevenson. That's been the last couple of days. I've read both of those. So I have a lot of light reading too. And I just, it is harder to read than it used to be because there are so many distractions now, but I try.
Are there any other Schulweisian pieces of sermons, of teachings, of theology that?
So I reviewed. I first of all, I read his book about evil and suffering, the theology book, which again I got a tremendous amount out of, but you have to read it like sentence by sentence. That's Schulweis at his densest and most intellectually demanding. But In God's Mirror, if people haven't read that, which is a sort of collection of his pieces, which I think I reviewed for the Jewish Journal many years ago. That whole idea that when the Torah was given, it looked like a mirror to everyone, that is, they saw themselves in it, is what he did. I don't want to say he did this best, but one of the best things that he did was nobody else related psychology, theology, and community as well as Schulweis. He had all 3 in mind all the time. And that's why he was able to create community structures, like the Chavurah structure, and individuals saw individuals like power rabbinics, and still did deep theological work such that other rabbis could learn from him. And that's an unbelievable legacy. And all I can say is that my father, who was a very wise and a very smart man, was right. He was the most talented man in the American rabbinate.
Yeah. I feel lucky that I got to be part of that. I got to hear him in person. I got to sit at his feet a little bit. Thank you. Thank you for spending the time with us today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, always nice. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thanks, Ari. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage Podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky-Weiser at SADCON Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.info.